Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I hope all of you are having fun at DevOps India Summit 2022. My name is Ria, and I'm your host for this wonderful conference. I hope all of you are enjoying our sessions. So we did see some of the tweets, some of the LinkedIn status messages that I saw today in the daytime. Thank you so much for being so interactive, and I hope all of you are really enjoying all the sessions that we have had since morning and let us know your thoughts. We would love to have to know your thoughts in the coming hours as well. The session is still going on. We have few more hours left, so please let us know your thoughts on our sessions with the hashtag DOIS22. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to introduce our next keynote speaker, somebody whom I deeply admire personally. Well, he's highly recognized as a thought provoking leader in the fascinating world of DevOps. He currently serves as the VP Architecture at Fidelity Investments with a deep focus on the DevOps domain. Previously, he was at Capital One, wherein he spent more than a decade leading their DevOps transformation journey. Taking the center stage in a few moments from now, he's going to share his golden nuggets of insights on the role of open source in DevOps success and how it is a good match for the enterprise. Let's have a roaring round of applause. Please help me welcome onto the East stage, all the way from the US, Dr. Tapabrata, aka Topo. Here he is.
Hey, nice to see you here. It's been a while, right? I know it's not in person, but it's still better than recorded. So we are live and I'm virtual. So great to meet you. Thank you for the awesome introduction.
Great to
So
see you, Tapo.
yeah,
And we're very, very pleased to have you with us once again at the DevOps India Summit. Thank you so much for joining us as a keynote speaker this time. And I hope you're already all set to go. And without much further ado, I would hand over the reins of this proceeding to you. Please take it
thank you,
on.
thank you. All right. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you are. I'm in the east coast of US, so it's early morning for me. So, if I just tend to fall asleep, so I think I'll just wake up just by my own speech. So, anyway, so today my topic is open source loves DevOps, and it's bi-directional. And my purpose of my talk is to kind of prove that point, and I walk you through the whole story step by step. Now, I have been talking about DevOps loving open source, meaning that you need to embrace DevOps, you need to adopt open source, uh, and you need to contribute to open source, you need to consume open source in a responsible manner and all that for your DevOps success. So that has been my thought over the last 1 decade. But over the last 1 year, I realized one more thing, that for success of open source needs DevOps. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship between open source and DevOps, and that's the whole idea behind my talk. So I would like to walk you through. I do not want to present the agenda because well, that will kind of, I think, spoil the whole story. So let's go step by step. And before I go, I want to again reintroduce myself because I do have a slide for this. So currently, I am a vice president in Fidelity Investment Architecture Department, and I focus on DevOps domain as well as open source governance. Before that, I was a senior distinguished engineer at Capital One, but essentially, I consider myself being a developer, an engineer, an open source contributor, and I'm also very, very passionate about DevOps and the cultural movement that DevOps brings in. I speak at many conferences, and I latest news is that I actually co-authored a book, and on the side you can see investments are limited. It's about a fictitious company going through some audit and compliance challenges and how they got out of that. So it's kind of telling the story. There are 8 other authors besides me. It's been a fun journey writing this book. I think that you like this book, and it is becoming available on Amazon and other places starting September 13th. The last thing is I'm also a programming committee member of this conference, and I'm very much honored about that. And I'm also a programming committee member of DevOps Enterprise Summit for UK and the US. So that's about me. Uh, Before I start, there's some interesting numbers that I gathered around open source. Around 2024 or about that time, 63% of world's running software will be open source software. I often get a question around how much open source do we use at enterprises? There's no solid number behind that, but we all know that it's huge. And this number tells you that by 2024, most of world's running software will be open source. In AI ML, more than 70% software is open source, so it is again more than the traditional software. Top four open source ecosystems like Java, Node.js, Python, Go have seen 73% increase in downloads. That's huge. Python library downloads have increased by 90%. Of course, in AI ML, since the usage has gone up, which is mostly Python, I think. Uh, there's no surprise that this number is at 90%. And then I myself did some research on how much open source is used in a typical Java microservices on an average, and I found that number to be astonishingly high, 98%. So if you write a Java Spring Boot application or just Spring Boot microservices, 98% of that source of that code base would be open source, and only the 2% at the most, maybe even less, will be actually your custom code. So that's amazing. Now, 89% of IT leaders see open source as more secure. And there's a reason behind that. The idea is that since it's open source, everybody sees the code, and that's why it gets more secured by nature. But there is some other side of that too, which is called bystander law, meaning that if you see something, you don't say something because you assume that somebody else will say something. So this the last one is may or may not be true. We don't know. We think that overall open source is more secure, and I believe that that is to be true, but somebody needs to prove that. Uh, so we all talked about open source and the great usage of open source and open source being more secure, and then this happened. The whole industry kind of buckled down under that weak link of Log4j. I took this funny picture from a tweet, so I have a reference to the tweet below. Now, it's interesting that the whole IT industry was being supported by this small community who maintained and managed Log4j for a while. And as soon as some vulnerability was popped up, then the whole industry kind of buckled down last year around December. And I go through the timeline also. Uh, Out of that, before I go further into my story, I would like to call out that this is an attribution from my side, that this talk is totally based on an IT Revolution forum paper. And by that, what I mean is that uh, every year, IT Revolution, led by Jane Kim, we meet as a group, a large group, about anywhere between 30 to 50 people, and we kind of break up ourselves into smaller group, and we focus on current day's problem. And this year, or last year, actually this year, 2022, we focused on, one of the groups focused on learning from Log4Shell. And then we actually researched and we interviewed a lot of people, and we finally came up with a white paper. It's going to get published in fall, so be on a lookout for this. I think IT Revolution will send out email or on LinkedIn and Twitter about that. Now, this had been co-authored by Randy Shuk, myself, Michael Neigert, Chris Hill, Dominica. Randy is from eBay. I'm from Fidelity. And Michael is he's the famous author of the book called Release It. Chris Hill is from T-Mobile, and Dominica, you all know. she's awesome. She's with Desktop, and she's also the author of a famous book on Kanban processes. Now, along with this paper, we interviewed a lot of industries leaders or companies about their response to Log4Shell. So I'm kind of going to start with that. And then I'm going to actually at some point deviate from the original paper to get some of my own thoughts that may or may not be related to Log4Shell, but kind of linking the bridge or bridging the gap between direct correlation between open source and DevOps. With that, let's talk about the stories. So, as we said that as a part of that paper, we talked to many, not as in hundreds, but a handful number of good large enterprises about their responses to Log4j last year. And out of that came out three patterns, major patterns. And then, of course, not everybody is in the same bucket, as you all know, but I'm going to call them the good, the bad, the ugly. The good guys, the bad guys, and then when I name like that, then people say, hey, don't call some company ugly. So we kind of change the whole idea to just say number one, number two, number three, and don't qualify anything. So this is about three stories about Log4j responses based on feedback that we received, anonymous feedback that we received from these anonymous companies, and then we group together. So what I am going to do is kind of walk through these uh, three sets of stories, and we wanted to classify these based on when they detected there was a problem, when the announcement came out from their within leadership, from senior leadership or cybersecurity group or infosec group, that there is a problem. What did they do around impact analysis and mitigation? And then how did they remediate, or what was the remediation cycle? And then the impact on people in that company. So this grouping is based around on these categories. Now, while we did that, we basically noted down every bit of information that we could gather by interviewing some of the engineers, and we actually laid out hour by hour, day by day, what they did in terms of responding to Log4j. So everyone knows that the first news of Log4j vulnerability came out on Twitter on December 9th. I still remember that date and that time, that right after dinner, I opened up my Twitter feed and I saw this. And I think most of IT that follow Twitter have seen that too. So this is kind of the start. I'm not saying that, and everybody knows that this is not when the vulnerability was found. It was actually found much before that, around November, third week of November. And then this is the day it was unofficially disclosed. So December 9th, 6:48 p.m. Eastern Time, that was when this became public. Now, in terms of detection, both these, all these groups, number one, number two, number three, they all detected this almost at the same time. So, number one, in the evening of December 9th, cyber engineering noticed that this tweet was there, and then they alerted their SCA. Now, SCA is Software Composition Analysis Platform, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but essentially it analyzes your source code or your artifact and finds out your open source dependencies, and then checks if there are vulnerabilities in those. So that's called software composition analysis, and many companies use such tools. Either it is homegrown or commercial. Now, each each of these are kind of supported in the enterprise in terms of a platform. So group number one, these companies have SCA platform team. They notified their platform team, hey, I saw this tweet. Do you know anything about that? And then Other engineers noticed too, and then their internal intercompany messaging systems got a little flooded with different comments about this Log4j vulnerability. And then the SCA platform team sent some email to SCA vendor, hey, we are seeing this, what say you? Now, during that time, group number two engineer noticed the same thing, and then they notified their ISO, information security officer, assigned to their particular team. And for group number three, nothing happened. They just either saw it or ignored, or they really don't recall what happened. The interesting part of this is that you have to notice that InfoSec or cybersecurity team was not the first group to notice this particular thing. So it is already crowdsourced, the information of Log4j vulnerability. Now, on the announcement side, morning of December 10th, the next day, the SCA vendor for the group number one companies, they confirmed that this is a zero-day vulnerability. And then the engineers started seeing some alerts in their Git repository there because they had shifted left the whole open source vulnerability checking, something like GitHub Dependabot kind of mechanism. And they started seeing some of the alerts coming up. Cyber team declares zero-day vulnerability. They inform the senior leadership team, and then mass email starts early in the morning of December 10th. Whereas number two group, they are the medium performance, I should say. Their ISO starts notifying internal red team, and the red team is discussing with the third-party vendors to find out if this is this is really a zero-day. They confirm that. Then CISO is informed during the midday, and senior leadership team meeting during the late afternoon to discuss action plan. Now, if you look at group number three, on that same afternoon of December 10th, the red team receives daily feeds, receive the daily feed in the morning, but then, they are taking it easy. Enterprise Risk Office was notified before noon, around noon time, and then meeting with cyber enterprise risk officer, uh, that various DevOps teams are notified, and then the risk is entered in the risk management team, risk management system. Now, if you notice at this point that you clearly see that group number one, group number two, and group number three has a different time frame in terms of the response, at least in the announcement phase. And of course, by the announcement, I mean when InfoSec actually officially called it, it's a fire, right? Now, on the impact analysis side, this is when you first stop the bleed, and then you kind of measure what your blast radius is and try to understand where all you need to focus on. In that phase, before noon on group number one, they have a new WAF rule to block some of these calls coming in. That has been deployed before noon. By noontime, they all identified the impacted repositories using their SCA platform team's capabilities. And by afternoon, external facing applications start deploying figs via their automated CI/CD pipeline. And of course, there are some variations in there, but overall, that's what happened on day number one, which is December 10th, in terms of impact analysis and mitigation for group number one. Group number two on this side, during the evening time, they had some action plan created. During the night time, new WAF rule got deployed. Is the same thing that group number one did in the morning or before noon. And then during December 11th, 12th, they struggled to create, group number two struggled to create a full impact list because of some of the things that they did not happen. I'll talk about that a little later. And then they, of course, they focus on external facing application. They somehow got that list created. And then, they created also custom script developed to search through all their internal Git repositories to find out where all Log4j is being used. So this is kind of after the fact thought that, hey, we actually do not have a good way to know the whole impact list for that particular library. So we need to write some custom script. And a lot of heroism has gone into this too. Uh, Group number three is interesting. They are classic CMDB driven enterprises. And then, they first reached out to their CMDB team, and then, asked them to create a list of Java applications from CMDB. And it's interesting how they actually captured the Java applications in CMDB. It's apparently, and it's not just one company, it's actually three or four companies that gave us this feedback that they have CMDB, and in their CMDB, when they create application, they actually ask the application owner to identify the technologies behind that particular application, and by that, they actually can identify what are Java applications and what are other applications, etc. So they actually use CMDB to get that list. Now, based on that list, they sent out email to all application owners, and then they have established a project management structure. It's more like a program management to establish and track the progress of all the work related to Log4j. Let's talk about the remediation cycle. And just on the outset, I would say that this remediation was not easy for many reasons. And one of the major reasons was that there are multiple of these because, the patches kept coming, started with 2.15, 2.16, 2.17, and 2.17.1, and in between 1.2. So there are many of these. So given that, group number ones, started remediating their external facing application on the previous day, but by 11 and 12, they're all done with their external facing applications. December 13, the internal facing application starts the fix. So of course you can understand why they had to do that, because they want to make sure that the external facing applications that are accessible from the internet are first fixed so that nobody can come in. And of course, we all know that that may or may not be true, but from this perspective, that may be the right way to do it. In group number two, on the other hand, on December 13th, during the afternoon, new vulnerabilities were published, as you all know, and then the confusion on which version to use. And this is one of the things that you can tell that if you do it slow, then and multiple patches come in, then you really don't know, should I be doing 16 or should I go to 17 or where should I go? So there was a confusion around that in all of these group two companies. Around December 14, they actually created virtual war rooms because of this confusion. And then, around December 15, towards the end, they had 54% of their external facing applications were fixed, and some were in production. And that is because they did not have full end-to-end automated CI/CD pipeline. Number three gets in more interesting day by day. They started manually fixing that and semi-manual deployments. And then, of course, they do have, incorrect impact analysis. So they did have a list, but nobody knew or nobody actually could guarantee whether the list was right. Now, project became in red status right from the get-go. Now, let's talk about, I'm trying to go to the next slide. Sorry, let me back up a little bit. Yes, so that's it. So remediation cycle continued because there are multiple patches. And then, this for group number one, during December 13 to 18, two new vulnerabilities popped up. We all know that. And this group actually just fixed it, and their automated CI/CD pipeline deployed the changes to production. Not much pain other than doing it over and over again. On two, war room continues throughout December, and external facing applications were fixed multiple times via automated pipelines. Internal facing applications had some trouble for most of these companies, and most of these companies had a deadline that by end of January, all internal facing applications should be fixed. Some actually bled into February, but overall, that's the high level timeline. On the group number three side, some applications were actually shut down due to fear that somebody will break in. So they actually had to shut down some internet-facing applications, which was like blew our mind when we came to know that. Not everyone. I mean, that we actually we got that feedback from one company, and we thought that we should call that out because this is mind blowing. And then, of course, no clear path inside. The interesting thing is aftershock continues, right? And it's just the companies. They also use everybody uses vendor software, and overall we found that the vendors were the slowest to fix their stuff. So starting January 22, vendors started sending fix to group number one companies, and they deployed right through their continuous delivery pipeline that they had, automated one. For group number two, during January, February, they fixed all the internal applications. Vendor apps patch continues, not 100% done, but overall well under control. Group number three, most known applications are fixed, and known is in code because, as we have guessed, that nobody actually knew what their actual list is. So if you knew it, it was fixed. If it's not known, it was not fixed. Kind of finger crossed. At this point, let's talk about also the effect on people. And we all want to forget these few weeks and months from late December 2021 to early of this year. For group number one, but if you notice group number one, two, and three here, the effect on people were different. And this is very, very important. And we wanted to paint this picture clearly that for group number one, the frustration was, hey, I'm seeing multiple vulnerabilities. As soon as I patch something, new vulnerability comes out. That was one of the biggest frustration among the engineers. Many or few had to delay their vacation for a few days. Nobody missed planned vacation overall. Group number two, people got burnt out because not all of their changes were manually detected or productionized. Most Java developers had to cancel vacations. So that's where the people impact comes in. Many others canceled their vacations, like associated, the InfoSec people, the senior leadership, and a platform team, etc. January, February is where they actually started the vacation. So the whole December and January kind of was in there in fixing these things. They had to cancel the vacation. And then during January, February, even some companies bled into March in allowing people to take their missed vacation. For group number three, people got totally burnt out. Nobody knew where things were. Nobody knew where things will go. And then, of course, they call for action, which is setting up or starting on DevSecOps journey. Now, given all that, let's talk about the characteristics of these three groups. The good, or the number one, they had a SIA tool integrated with all of their code repositories, meaning every change actually was scanned, and any feedback were given to the developers about their open source consumption and their vulnerability, not only security vulnerability, but also licensing vulnerability. They had complete SBOM for all repositories, and SBOM, I should have put a quote around the SBOM, not like a SPDX format or Cyclone DX format, but they did have a proprietary form of SBOM, all these companies. They exactly knew which repository uses what open source library. They had fully automated CI/CD pipeline. Uh, they had matured release engineering and change management process, which actually allowed things to get released at a very high speed or even on demand within matter of a couple of hours or 1 hour or even faster than that. They had good engineering culture and collaboration, and this is very important because if you have traditional siloed infosec team and dev team and ops team, they couldn't have done this. Good engineering culture. Hey, this is the thing. Let me get some help for you. Or hey, what should I do? I'm done with the fix. Can I go to the next phase, which is production deployment or non-production deployment? All these good engineering culture actually really help group number one companies. For the next group, they are not so good. They have limited SCA coverage, not totally shifted left, but it's kind of mix. Some had in the pipeline, some had outside the pipeline or out of band scan, if you will. They did not have insight into full SBOM or simple dependency tree for all of their source code. So that's why they had to write some custom script to find out where the dependencies are or being used. They have semi-automated CI/CD pipeline, yes, and to call that out, because just because somebody has a Jenkins job does not mean that they have this automated CI/CD pipeline. So they had Jenkins jobs, but not kind of all the way through production. There are manual steps in between. They have some good change management processes. All these companies had traditional good change management process that could actually help the developers sending out emergency fixes if needed be in a good fast manner. They also had good collaboration. And the bad part of that, they had a bit of hero culture going on in the group two companies. Hey, let me write some script, let me gather some info. I'll just spend through the whole night and gather the info and come back in the morning. And the same guy then went on to helping others and all that. So bit of hero culture was observed for these companies. The bad, or the number three group, they had no SCA. They had classic CMDB driven risk management. So if somebody in their CMDB entry did not call out this is a Java application, nobody would know that this is a Java application. These companies had DevOps teams, but not so effective. They are just Jenkins job or Jenkins platform runner. They are not true DevOps team. And of course, I've been talking about these DevOps teams. In my mind, there should be nothing called DevOps teams. DevOps should not be a job description. Group number three companies also had weak engineering culture and silos that actually restricted information flow. They did not help each other quite well. In fact, they went against each other many a times. Now, given that, uh, let me now go back to the question, why did I start my talk by saying open source loves DevOps? And the following thread is now going to answer that question. Now, if you have to notice that open source come in many forms. We don't usually pay attention to all of them, but these are the classification that I could come up with. They can be standalone executable, they can be development tools or utilities, they could be dependencies, they could be even just pure simple source code, uh, and the different formats, jar, tar, zip, docker image, whatever. So just wanted to call out that open source is just not about this log4j or some JavaScript library. They come in many forms and sizes. They also come in many ways, such as developers can directly download from public sites. Pipelines can download it from build dependencies, whether they use some internal artifact or Nexus kind of proxies, or they go directly out to internet. They get those dependencies via their build processes. Internal software download side. Many companies have internal software download side where they curate these things and then developers can download from that side. Production systems, we have seen many times that they directly download from public sites. Open source code, in fact, gets into internal source code because you can clone the Git repositories on or GitHub repository on your laptop, and then you can, push it into your own internal GitHub or Git repositories. And there are many other variations, but overall, this is kind of the pattern. So, given that, uh, we also know these open source vulnerabilities are on the rise, like 650% year to year in 2001 increase in supply chain attacks. About 30 to 40% of top 10% open source projects have at least one vulnerability. Uh, Only 20% of Maven Central artifacts are used in most applications. So you can see that the top Oasis projects having at least one vulnerability, and most of these Maven Central artifact or the 20%, but being used in most application makes most of the applications actually vulnerable to open source vulnerability. Uh, and the funniest thing is that Maven Central still sees vulnerable Log4j downloads. So question is, who is using vulnerable Log4j still today? We don't know, but we know that they are. Uh, So question is, how do we defend ourselves given that there are many forms of open source and many forms of way open source can come in and the vulnerabilities on the rise and people are still using vulnerable software? How do you defend ourselves? So number one, collaborate internally and externally. Collective responsibilities. If you see something, say something. Bring in a good DevOps culture. Shift left your security beyond just CI/CD pipeline. Got to have fully automated delivery pipeline. Additional discovery process must be needed because not everything can be discovered through your automated processes. And then, of course, you need community-driven approach to major upgrades. Now, how did the group number one do? And they did all this. They had collaborative process within themselves. They had collective responsibility and all that. So, how do you defend ourselves? I would say be number one and more. And guess what? All these practices that we have, I just talked about, equates to DevOps. These are actually DevOps good practices. So I actually proved my point saying that open source loves DevOps because DevOps depends upon open source. To get success in DevOps, you need to use open source, you need to contribute to open source, you need to responsibly consume open source and all that. But also, to responsibly consume open source, you need to adopt DevOps. So it is bi-directional. And with that, I'm going to pause here and want to thank the organizers for inviting me to this awesome conference and giving me the opportunity to talk to you. At this point, I'll actually see if there are any questions that I can answer.
All right. Thank you, Topo, for your great insights on DevOps and open source, how they go hand in hand in ensuring business collaboration. So, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. We do have a few questions, but before that, I want to ask a question to you. We all know that open source software gives us many advantages from a business perspective. Now, when we look at DevOps and open source, do you think it is a case of chicken and egg? Can we have DevOps without open source at all?
Uh, Technically, you can, but most likely not, because as we know, and we have been talking about for years, about a decade now, to get success in DevOps, you need to embrace open source because first of all, your latest and greatest technology are all open source. Either directly or indirectly, you are going to use open source, no question asked. Even if you use vendor software, you're going to use open source underneath that. And as I said, as I measured in some of the Java microservices, 98% code on a given application is open source, and rest is custom code. So that proves that even if you use a commercial software, most likely that 90% of that code is open source anyway. So there's no way not using open source. So you got to use open source. That's given. And the number two is that the whole open source culture is culture of collaboration and sharing and respecting each other is kind of a DevOps culture. So they kind of
Right.
go hand in hand. So culturally they are tied, technically they are tied, and also the
Hmm.
people who you hire these days. They are all accustomed to open source software sharing, GitHub.com, etc. So, yep, they go hand in hand, and that's why my talk is titled as DevOps Open Source Loves DevOps and is bi-directional.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Now, we have a comment coming up from one of our users, and the person says that open source often misguides people into believing that it is for sure peer reviewed very often and regularly, but which is something that has not been proven yet. What do you have to say
So,
to that?
yeah, so I kind of briefly touched upon this, right? So we assume, or
Yeah,
80,
you did.
90% of IT leaders assume that open source is safe and secure, but it's kind of the comparison, right? Uh, there is a thing called bystander effect. A bystander effect is that if you see something bad as a group, you always assume the other person is calling it out and not you. And that is actually very true in open source. That's one point. And it's like, hey, I saw the defect, but I don't have time to respond to that. Maybe some other guy will see it and react to that. It's not going to be me. I don't have enough time. But overall, the notion is that since many people are actually seeing it, many security researchers also are also seeing it. So, and they are reacting to it. And then, there is also these, bounty hunters that actually use this opportunity, which is a good thing, very good thing, that
Mhm.
can detect open source vulnerability and also provide fix. I think overall, I think that even if I cannot prove it directly, I think that open source is a little more secure than closed source, just because there are many people are saying it. The other thing is that I think that the most used open source are more secure than the less used open source, because less used open source products are not that active, and people
Sensitive.
don't pay much attention and may have
Mm.
vulnerabilities that we don't know about.
Oh, that's a very strong point that you said. I think a lot of us had not even thought about it in that way. For us, something that is freely available is something that, the first thought that comes to our mind is it's absolutely insecure. I mean, there is no security. It comes with a lot of data threats. So, thank you for clarifying that. I have another question for you. People are very opinionated when it comes to using open source tools. They have all these thoughts in their minds. I don't want this version control. I don't want to use this tool. I prefer that tool. So, how do you get a consensus in order to move forward from there?
Yes, there are a lot of opinions around these. The tools or technologies or programming languages or whatnot. Uh, it is always a challenge, to be honest with you, in large enterprises. There are two sides to it. One is you have to encourage your engineers to look out for new things and new technologies and embrace new things. At the same time, you need to have some kind of stability within your large enterprises, because at the end you are actually serving the customer, and customer don't care whether you are using Go language or mainframe languages, right? So
Hmm.
I just wanted to bring that out. The customer focus is important, but at the same time, you have to have something for the engineers, for them to be excited all the time. What the few things that may work in the enterprise, in big enterprise, you actually can make it totally community driven. You can tell a community of engineers saying that, hey, I am okay to have three technologies, but not 23. You guys figure out what those top three should be and come back to, so I think in a community manner, you get much better success than individually managing them. So that I should call out. But yes, I completely acknowledge the fact that it is a challenge for all our technology leaders to get a balance between the new and shiny things versus the stability.
Right. And I think that the point that you said, to involve the engineers and ask them to choose the best tools that they feel out of the 10, 15, 20 options that they have. I mean, as we said, like DevOps is a collaborative effort, and so is the whole point of using open source in DevOps. So I think when we leave an option, we leave a choice to the engineers to even make a choice. I think that makes them feel empowered, and I think it's a part of the whole collaborative approach
Yep.
of DevOps and open source.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And there's one question from the audience. What are your thoughts on the best open source tools that can be used to implement DevOps?
Base open source tools to implement DevOps. Oh man, there are so many.
So
It's
many.
a huge list, and actually, there's I don't know if you all have seen uh, DevOps tools periodic table. That's an interesting one. I think you just Google DevOps tools periodic table, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And there are so many that I should not call out any individual one, but everybody knows the famous ones. the most popular ones like Jenkins as CI tool, and then SonarQube as code scanning tool, and so on and so forth. But I do not want to call out any because there are so many of them.
Wow. And when you talk about periodic table, I think a lot of us, the first thing that comes to our mind is the one that we studied in chemistry
Right,
in our
right.
school time.
Yeah. Just Google DevOps tools periodic table. You'll see. You'll see. It's nicely done.
All right. I hope all of you, all the viewers watching us, do that right now. And if you have any questions more on open source tools and DevOps, you can reach out to Tapopal. He's here right now with us. And if you want to reach out to him after the summit is over, his handles is all there. You can reach out to him on LinkedIn as Dr. Tapabrata. And Tapo, if you have any other handles to share with the audience, please do that.
Yeah, my Twitter handle is at Topopal, just like my name, just without the space. At that, that's my Twitter handle. So just reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to answer any question if I know the answer.
And trust me, Topper will definitely help you. I have personally interviewed him, I've personally spoken to him. He's one of the nicest people we have in the DevOps galaxy.
Oh, thank you,
All
thank
right.
you very much.
No, my pleasure. I truly mean that. All right, Topo, I'll not take much of your more time. Thank you so much for joining us at the DevOps India Summit in this edition. I hope to see you very soon in a in-person event, very soon in the DevOps Summit itself in the next edition. Then next year, maybe we have a live session all planned out for us. I hope to see you that time. And till then, thank you so much for joining us and please have a great day.
All right, thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, Topo. Thank you for joining us. All right, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we come to the end of this keynote session. That was Tapabrata, aka Topo. And you can find him on LinkedIn as Dr. Tapabrata, as he just mentioned. And he's also there on Twitter. And trust me, he's very, very active and he will surely respond to any of your queries if you have any. All right, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we come to the end of the session. We have one more keynote session coming up in 2 hours from now, and that will be the final keynote session for the day. But in between, we have all the three tracks running live. I hope all of you have attended those sessions. The sessions that have been live since morning, they are right now available on the website as an on-demand session. You can please go there, watch the sessions, and let us know your thoughts, your ideas on how you felt the session, how it was, what is your feedback on that. We would love to hear from you. Please let us know your thoughts with the hashtag DOIS22 on LinkedIn and Twitter. So, with that, we come to the end of the session. I'll see you very soon in the next keynote session. Till then, this is Ria Kumar signing off. Thank you.